All right, diving into something that's really caught the attention of folks online. And yeah, it's a tough one.
Yeah.
We're talking about the woman in the UK got life in prison for, the murder of her parents, which is horrible enough. But
Right.
it's the extra details, the things you don't normally hear that have people kind of creeped out and fascinated.
Absolutely. And that's what we're here to untack, right? I mean, it's one thing to talk about what happened, but the real question, the why behind it all, that's what gets me. Like in this case, this woman lived with the bodies for years.
Yeah.
Years before anyone knew.
4 years, if I'm remembering right. 4 years.
4 years. Like, just try to imagine that for a second. The mental, I don't even know the word, the sheer will it would take to do that. It's a lot to process.
Absolutely. And then on top of that, you've got how she acted when they finally caught her. Like,
Mhm.
no remorse, almost casual, telling the police, cheer up, at least you caught the bad guy. Who says that?
Chilling, right. And that right there is a big clue, because that kind of reaction, that flatness, it suggests a very specific way of seeing the world. And it's something you see pop up again and again with these really unsettling crimes. It often points to someone who might be, and this is a clinical term, a psychopath.
Okay, so not to interrupt, but I think this is important because people hear psychopath and they immediately think like Silence of the Lambs.
Right, exactly. Big misconception.
Yeah. So for those of us who didn't go to med school,
Basically, it's not about being evil for the sake of it. It's about a real lack of empathy. They understand things logically, but feeling them, connecting with them emotionally, that's where the disconnect is.
so in her case, her being so nonchalant, almost like she was reading from a script, it's not necessarily her being cold-hearted on purpose. It's more that she might just not be wired to get why it's such a big deal.
Exactly. Like a disconnect between the head and the heart. And it's a disconnect that's, well, it's unsettling to most of us because we just can't relate. But it's a pattern you see in other famous cases too.
Oh, totally. It's like that story someone shared in the forum about Dennis Nielsen, the British serial killer. I think he said something like, good grief, how awful. When they found body parts at his place, like, what?
Precisely. It's that lack of genuine emotional response that's so jarring. And it makes you wonder about what else is going on in their minds, you know?
Mm.
Especially with this woman, thinking about the fact that she lived with those bodies in her space for years. I mean, the smell alone.
Oh, God, yeah. And it's not just the physical aspect, right?
Yeah.
Someone who worked at a funeral home, I think they were training or something, even they said that just knowing the bodies were down in the basement, it messed with them, like, deeply.
Exactly. It's heavy stuff. And it makes you wonder, how do you compartmentalize that? Not just the act itself, but the aftermath, a constant reminder. It suggests some serious, like maybe a trauma response, dissociation, maybe.
So you're saying it's not just about having a strong stomach, it's about her mind almost breaking under the pressure. And this disconnect, this dissociation is how she coped.
It's possible. It's like a defense mechanism, allows her to function without being, crippled by guilt or whatever. But here's the other thing. It's not just about blocking it out completely. It also plays into how she treated, or I guess mistreated, the bodies after the murders.
You're talking about the dad being like laid out in that homemade tomb thing she built versus the mom who was basically just, wrapped in plastic.
Exactly. That difference, that's huge, tells you a lot about the potential dynamics at play here, even years earlier. Like, was she closer to one parent, maybe even resented the other? You start to see these little clues, like how she always referred to her father's body as my dad, but her mom's was just it.
Ugh, yeah. Someone else pointed that out online, and it's seriously creepy when you think about it.
It is. And it makes you wonder if there's more to the story there. Like, what if the mom was the main caregiver? And maybe there was some resentment building up over time. Could explain the different treatment.
Right. And that's what makes this whole thing so fascinating, so tragic. And then there's the whole motive thing, right? Like on paper, it's greed, plain and simple. She inherits everything, gets her hands on, was like 170,000 pounds.
Yeah, from the pensions, right.
Right, the pensions. But part of me wonders, was it really as straightforward as just wanting the money?
Well, that's the thing about motive, isn't it? Especially with someone who might be wired a little differently, potentially psychopathic tendencies. What seems logical to us, like cold-blooded greed, might look totally different from their perspective.
So it's not so much about the actual money as it is what it represents to them.
Exactly. Could be about control, a sense of power, even if it's twisted. Maybe it's about proving they don't need anyone, that they can take care of themselves, even if it means doing something horrific. It's all about perspective.
And remember, a few people online brought this up, this idea that given her personality, Maybe she didn't really have the means to get that kind of money any other way. Like legitimately, I mean.
Right, like 170 grand, it might not seem like that much to some people, but
Yeah.
in her world, it could be a lifetime of, I don't know, freedom from having to play by society's rules.
Freedom she took, tragically.
Yeah.
And it makes you think about how one choice, however messed up, can have these huge ripple effects. And speaking of which, one of the craziest things about this whole case is how it all unraveled. It wasn't some big investigation. It was, well, it was pretty random, actually.
You mean the dad's doctor?
The doctor. The guy realizes his patient hasn't picked up his meds in years. Years. And that's what blows the whole thing wide open.
It's wild, right? I mean, think about it. She had this whole charade going, sending birthday cards, making excuses for years, all to keep up appearances.
Talk about premeditation. I mean, to not only plan the murders, but then the cover-up, the fake life.
Mm-hmm.
It's both meticulous and terrifying.
And the fact that it was something as simple as a prescription, that's what undid her. I don't know, there's something almost, I don't know, poetically ironic about that.
Definitely. And it makes you realize, even now, with everyone connected online and everything, people can still just vanish, especially older folks who might be more isolated anyway.
Sad but true. And that's something a lot of folks online were saying too. Like, it makes you wonder about your own neighbors, you know? What's going on behind closed doors? Are we paying enough attention? Someone even said, and this is kind of dark, but makes you think how many people we pass every day who are either silently screaming for help or worse.
Yeah, that's heavy. And it makes this whole case even more disturbing, you know?
Recently.
It really makes you think, you know? Like you hear these stories and you try to make sense of them, but some things are just unexplainable.
It's true. And that's the thing about human psychology, right? It's not like math, there's not always a clear-cut answer. We can talk about psychopathy, but there's always more to it. Genetics, upbringing, experiences. It all gets tangled up.
Yeah, it's like trying to solve a puzzle, but someone swapped out half the pieces with something totally random. You're never going to get the full picture.
Exactly. And that's why these cases, as awful as they are, they're important to talk about. Not to gawk at the horror, but because maybe, just maybe, we can learn something, prevent something like this from happening again.
Totally. Like, if we get better at recognizing the warning signs, maybe someone can get help before it's too late. Or if we focus on building stronger communities so folks aren't so isolated.
Absolutely. Early intervention is key, right? But it starts with awareness, with actually seeing the people around us, not just the masks they wear.
That's deep. And it's so easy to get caught up in our own lives,
Yeah.
you know? But like you said, sometimes just listening, just letting someone know they're not alone, that can make all the difference.
It really can. In this case, it's a stark reminder of that. Because the consequences of not noticing, of turning away, they can be devastating.
No doubt. Well, this has been a lot. And as always, we want to hear from you. What really stuck with you about this case? What questions are still bugging you? The whole point of this deep dive is to get people thinking, to start conversations that matter. So until next time, keep those brains buzzing, keep asking those tough questions. And remember, sometimes the most unsettling stuff is also the stuff that teaches us the most about ourselves.